to make it static and to say that this is the fixed process. And what you do is you suffocate the life out of this organic emergent process.
In the manuscript that I have in the PDF, the glossary comes first.
Yes, we did definitions in the beginning on purpose to sort of set the frame.
Yeah, so I'd like to actually get started there.
Let's do it.
Some of the key definitions that you go through are pivotal to understanding the ideas in the book. And so if we go through a few, and maybe you guys could pick the ones that you think are most important to, first of all, define what Marxism is, and what the Communist Manifesto is. So there's some key terms that you need to go through. And then also in the Uncommunist Manifesto, you define the dynamism of capitalism and things like that. So we should define dynamism. I think that is by the way, the title of the first chapter.
Static versus dynamic equality. Yeah, that's it.
So if we define a few of the key terms, it'll help this conversation move along, and it'll help readers understand like the purpose for writing the Uncommunist Manifesto. It's a unique name for one.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, I think, so much in the world today, people talk past each other because they have just different ideas of what these words mean. And of course, our leaders can't define words anymore, like what a woman is or what a recession is. So like those words constantly get redefined. And so we thought we'd start the book by just kind of having that level playing field by laying out these definitions. One of the bigger ideas we tackle in the book is the word capitalism, which for myself personally, I had started kind of getting away from, started to think about free markets, using that term instead. But Alex really said, no, like let's dig in, let's redefine what capitalism is and make a stand on that word. So we did. So yeah, definitions of words are important.
Since it is the Uncommunist Manifesto, let's define what Marx meant by the Communist Manifesto. Let's define Marxism.
I'll take a stab. I mean, we plucked the definition of communism right out of Marx's book, out of his own words. And it says the theory of the communist may be summed up in a single sentence: the abolition of private property. Now, Marxism more broadly, I think, covers a whole lot more than that. And I'll let Marx sort of discuss that. But, communism is this idea that there's no such thing as private property. All property is communally owned. It is owned by everyone. And it's a hard thing to grasp because, it's one of those things that sounds nice in theory. It sounds nice on the surface because we're used to living at home, for example. And, we have these common areas at home. And, probably at a macro, at a large scale, we've been convinced that public property is somehow a thing. We've sort of been convinced that the tragedies of the commons doesn't exist. And yeah, communism is kind of like it's a biologically inconsistent idea because we have evolved to basically have a relationship with property and to have to biologically be tied to territory and to something that is ours. And that's why, when a kid sort of crosses the 2-year-old threshold, they have a sense of something that is theirs. So anyway, I'll kind of leave it there as a really concise version of communism, which is not my definition. It's Marx's definition himself, but maybe yourself or Mark can dig into a little bit of Marxism as a broader terminology.
Yeah, I think, to Alex's point, he lays out exactly what communism is: abolition of private property. And I remember reading that for the first time and going, what is, like, does anybody know it says that? Because like they're okay with that if that's what it means. But in the book, the original book, Communist Manifesto, which we did not try to refute point by point, we just wrote a better version. But in there, he has 10 points of what Marxism is. So here's 10 points, here's what we have to do. And so I would guess, in my opinion, he was basically stating out 10 points of what Marxism is, to answer your question. So at number 1 is abolition of private property. Number 2, progressive or graduated income tax. Sounds familiar. 3, abolition of all rights of inheritance. So you can see in the United States how under attack that is. Inheritance tax. Number 4, confiscation of property of immigrants. Number 5, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank. State capital, exclusive monopoly. So central banks. So central banks, graduate income tax. We're starting to see how that sounds familiar. Number 6, centralization of the means of communication and transportation in the hands of the state. So transportation, communication, controlling how you can move and what you can hear and say. 7, extension of factories, so taking over the factories, productions of the state. 8, equal liability of all to labor, establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. So today we see the takeover of the food industry. Starts to make sense. Number 9, combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. So again, that's the takeover that we're seeing today. Gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country. That's a key one. If you've been following politics, you saw per the HUD, House of Housing Urban Development, they basically dictate how the nation is supposed to be laid out, what types of properties go where. And if local territories, counties comply with these directives, then they get funding, of course, right? And so under Obama, they were starting to change how that was done. And basically, they're trying to get away with suburbs. They don't want suburbs to be there anymore. And they want to force low income housing to go into suburbs to try to destroy that. Trump removed that from the from the HUD directive, and now the Biden administration has put that back into place. And when you read this right here, this abolition of the distinction between town and country. And so they want to break all that up. And then finally 10, free education for all children in public schools, which of course we see today. So that's what Marxism is. 10 points he laid it out for us.
Yeah, and when you're discussing those points, you're refuting it with capitalism, and we just talked about the difference between statists and dynamists, and capitalism falls in much more into the dynamist category because it's kind of like a living and evolving theory. There's no 10 points of capitalism. So let's lay out what a stasis is. That like 10 points for Marxism, and if we just follow that plan, then everyone's equal. That's kind of the stasis view that doesn't allow for innovation and evolution.
Yeah, I think one of the key takeaways from the book, and I think this is a novel approach to the idea of capitalism, and I mean, I personally haven't really seen it anywhere else. And it's this idea, we tried to take capitalism out of the realm of politics, because where I think a lot of people get stuck is that they start arguing about, capitalism is a right-wing ideology and, communism is left-wing and everything. We said, no. Capitalism is actually a process. It's an organic process. It's actually we've been doing it since the first time we grabbed a stick and threw it at an animal to save time and energy and more efficiently acquire food, for example. And then we did it when the guy next to us, he struck up the fire and we hunted the food and we shared, and that was division of labor. So capitalism as a process, like we are always looking to more efficiently and effectively utilize scarce resources, scarce energy, and the limited time we have. That's sort of like the bounds that we need to operate within. And that they're sort of the core pieces of capital that exist: time, energy, and matter, right? Our goal as human beings who are looking to basically transform, this is maybe getting a little metaphysical here, but like we're looking to transform chaos into order in some sense. We're trying to elevate the order and the value of things. What we're doing is we're taking this capital and we're economizing and more efficiently and effectively utilizing it. And that process, as I said, it's organic. It's not political. It's what we've been doing since the beginning of time. The issue is when we try and impose political modalities over the top, that we begin to suffocate the process. And this is effectively what communism is. It's an attempt to, as to use your word, to make it static and to say that this is the fixed process. And what you do is you suffocate the life out of this organic emergent process. It wants to experiment. Life is always looking to experiment. It tries 10 things, and of those 10, 2 succeed, 8 fail. It discards those 8. Of those 2 things, tries another 10 things, and you kind of can envision this branching effect. Communism assumes that it knows everything, it cuts off all the branches, creates one centralized root, and this is the source of truth. And it's madness, because that's just, it's anti-life, it's anti-emergent, it's anti-complex, it's anti-capitalist, it's anti all of these things. So I think this, to tie it back into the book, this is one of the real insights, I believe, of the book, is that it just takes capitalism as a concept outside of the realm of politics. And I think this is a very hard definition of capitalism for anybody, whether they're left, right, or centrist, whatever, to argue with. It's like, hey, capital is time, energy, matter. What are we looking to do with that stuff? We're looking to use it more effectively and more efficiently. That is the only moral thing to do with capital. So therefore, capitalism is a moral pursuit. And I just hope that really lands with people. And I hope that the book does a good job of explaining that, not just in the definitions, but throughout.
One thing I did want to comment about the writing of the book is that you take these pretty complex ideas and you write about them very simply. So it was an easy read for me, but I also have a classical education, so like a lot of the things that you're referencing, I like immediately understood where you were coming from. Marx himself and Engels too, they were both classically trained economists as well. They were in the school of Adam Smith. They just drew these radically different ideas about how to solve capitalism. And that's what you're talking about, is like, there's nothing to solve because it's an evolutionary process and it kind of solves itself in the marketplace. But Marx wanted to stop that. How is it that you think, just from doing the research and like putting together a easy to read critique of Marxist ideas, how do you think that Marx came to the opposite conclusions that Adam Smith did? They had a very similar critique of like the industrial age and factories and like how people come together to work together and how unions happen. They had a very similar critique, but then they derived very different solutions.
Well, I think that very point that you draw is a key point in breaking down the ideas of this book. So how is the two people trained in the same ideas drew two different conclusions? And that there proves the need, the necessity of having individualism versus collectivism, because us being two different individuals can look at the exact same thing and draw two different conclusions. And to the example that Alex was making before, that's how progress is made. So now we see different things, different solutions, and we go try different things, and we quickly start to experiment and try different ideas. Some win, some lose, and the bad ideas get cut off and we try new ideas. And so that right there proves the need for individualism. But I would say, to kind of dig into the exact question you're asking, how is that Marx drew such different conclusions while Adam Smith, had a different? But I think the difference is really what their worldviews were. So I think it's important to understand the time and place of when this book was written, but also who the book was written by. And so specifically, human beings love to justify for their failures. Human beings love to come up with reasons. Some people, right, their victim mentality, they want to justify their behaviors. And so Marx came from a wealthy family, and he didn't want to follow in the footsteps and be an attorney like his family did. And so he wanted to just write poetry and philosophy, but the marketplace didn't value that at that time. And so he wanted to have a life of writing, and he had a family and he couldn't provide for his family. He was very angry about that. Why does he have to go be this industrialist? Why does he have to go do these things to be able to provide for his family? He should be able to just, each according to their ability, each according to their need, he should be able to just write and have everything that he needs. And so I think there was this bitterness inside of him. He was angry that he couldn't get by with what he wanted at that time. And so this book is partly a justification for that reasoning, which I think is why it's so attractive today, is it also justifies a lot of people who read it for them to be lazy as well.
Yeah, I'd like to tack on that really quickly, Addison, is that I think there's a number of reasons, and as Mark said, is you got to understand the person who wrote these things and how they came to this conclusion. Because as I've said, Mark and I have tried to give Marx a little bit of a benefit of the doubt, because he grew up in a time when civilization was transitioning. It was transitioning from a feudal agrarian type civilization through a merchant oriented, a consumer, a market oriented civilization, and that's going to be messy. Like all complex organisms have to go through this process. Like you look at a business, a startup, right? In the beginning, the CEO, the founder of the startup, he's doing everything from making sales calls to writing code to cleaning the toilets to booking the calendar events, like everything, right? But as the company scales and matures, he hires other people to do that, but it has to sort of go through that process. And we say it in the book, and pardon my swear word here, but we say you have to eat shit first before you eat caviar, right? Like there's a process to these things. And Marx was just in the middle of the eating shit phase, and he just looked around, and his solution to this was to project his own kind of vitriol, jealousy, and envy, on the process, and said, no, because I can't make money and be rich like this capitalist over here, then this system is unfair. It should come under my control. And I was writing some notes here as Mark was talking, and the reality of life is that it's easier to destroy than it is to build. It's easier to bring someone down than it is to raise them up. Like entropy is, it's easier to go with entropy than it is to go against entropy, right? And Marx just basically made, like, you could boil down his entire philosophy, his entire book, to an academic justification for the entropy of behavior and entitlement. Like he just, let's make an academic justification for someone else doing the work and us, all getting an equal amount, right? So there was those bits. There's also this idea that I've got, which is the evil of the do-gooders. And it's these kind of people, and you see them today in politics and central planning. It's that they have this innate inability to kind of control or manage their own lives, that they project that non-control on everyone else. They just assume that everyone is incompetent and unable to make decisions for themselves. And as a result, they think they need to help everyone. When I was reading some stuff about Robespierre of the, of the French Revolution, and people would ask him, it's like, what do you do? And he said, I work 20 hours a day because I must fix the system. And like, I was reading that, I'm like, no one asked you, man. Like, go away. Leave us alone. Like, and that's these do-gooders have to like impose their, I'm here, Captain Fantastic, to save everyone. And it's like, well, no one called you, like, go away, please. And that's kind of, they do it in such a way, it's like they have no almost personal validation, that they must find the validation from imposing their ideas on others. And then a couple other points that I wrote here is people like Marx, you look at the difference between how him and Adam Smith viewed humanity. Adam Smith had enough faith in the ingenuity and capability of humans to say that, hey, this process is going to be messy, but they will find a way. They will correct. They will adapt to the feedback in the marketplace, and they'll figure it out. Marx has an extremely low perception and faith in the ingenuity and capability of human beings. He thinks they are absolute morons that need to be babysat by a state apparatus, and therefore all power must be vested in the state apparatus for human beings to survive. For if the state doesn't produce the food, everyone is going to starve. Like that's how low his faith is in human ingenuity and capability. It's very Luddite-like, as we kind of state in the book. And lastly is Marx had either a poor or basically zero understanding of human psychology. And Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot. He just, the Marxist idea is that remove privation, just give people what they need, just a bit of food and a bit of shelter, and then everyone will be happy, like we'll be in a state of bliss. It's absolutely moronic, because what do human beings do? We are always striving, we're always seeking to reach out and do something more. And that in itself creates new problems. That's that chaos to order process. We create, we take chaos, we create order, then we have a new level of higher ordered chaos, which we then try and transform further up the scale. And that's what we do as human beings. You can't just remove some privation and then everything is bliss. And that's, again, a very poor understanding of human psychology, poor faith in ingenuity and capability of human beings, this need to impose and be a do-gooder, jealousy, envy, entropy, all that sort of stuff is all mixed in there. And, you get Marxism as this abomination of an idea versus the Adam Smiths of the world who are just like, look, leave people alone and they'll figure it out.
Yeah. When I was in school, I studied the manuscripts of 1844, which Marx had written in 1844, and they were only published after he died. So they were like discovered in his papers. And in that, in one of the manuscripts, he articulated the idea that he thought, because we were moving out of a feudal society into an industrial one, that the political achievements of the U.S. Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the U.S. Constitution were political successes, and that they should be a model for the world. The one thing that they were lacking was economic control. So when I read that, I was like, how can that be? How can he see the political freedom that we get under the Constitution be coexist with what Lenin called control of the commanding heights of the economy, like food and energy and transportation? Like, how can those two things coexist in Marx's mind? I never figured out that question, and I'm only bringing it up because I'm still wondering, like, how could that be? How can you have political freedom but still have absolute control of the economy?
Well, yeah. I'm going to chime in really quickly here, and then Mark will throw it over to you. I just want to say one thing, is that I wrote a series of essays a couple of months ago that talk about Bitcoin and democracy, and I kind of make a statement there that politics is downstream from economics. The reason any politics exists is to figure out a way to operate economically. Because when you think about it, economics is human action. It's praxeology. The Austrians have been talking about this for a century now. It's how do I allocate my time, energy, and resources? And politics is merely a methodology for acting for economic ends. So politics comes downstream to economics. So what people like Marx and Engels, etc., never got through their thick heads was that by controlling economics, you by definition are going upstream to politics. So you actually stifle politics downstream anyway. So economics must be free. And then what you do is you try and, like, the ultimate politics is get the hell out of the way, basically. And that's what the American Constitution did well, is it created a hell of a lot of limitations in the political realm so that the upstream flow of economic energy could go through without being dammed. But these idiots wanted to impose political ideology on top of the economic piece. So they wanted to change the upstream piece and dam the flow of energy at the source. So they could never understand sort of what, the chicken and egg problem there. So I hope that sort of is helpful. But anyway, I'll throw it over to Mark to kind of either add on or.
No, I think you summed that up well. I mean, it comes from a poor understanding of it, and so I think that summarized it pretty well.
In the book, you use the phrase dynamic inequality, and it dances around the idea that Marx introduced to the world about class structure, like for the economic control that he was identifying in those 10 points. He had to have enemies. And so he created the idea of class structure, which we still carry to this day. We talk about the middle class, and we talk about lower or working class or whatever, or upper class. And this is just a point that I was reading about this morning, that the Biden administration just allocated $80 million to the I.O.U.S. to set up programs to go after the middle class. And they actually identified the middle class as the target for new taxation. So this idea of class.
I want to just correct that real quick, Addison. I wish it was 80 million.
It's 80
it was
billion.
A B. It's a B. 80 billion.
Yeah, so they're coming after us. But let's just draw a distinction between dynamic inequality, which really means there is no class structure, and people are mobile in society, versus Marx's idea of the classes being static. So it's this dynamism and status.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he drew the struggle between the two classes, as you said, which we think is an arbitrary division. I mean, the rich and the poor. Okay, well, what's rich and what's poor? Where does that divide start and come from? And then the rich are the oppressors, the poor are the oppressed. So at what point do you go from being poor to being rich? And then if you go from poor to being rich, you made an extra dollar that year, do you automatically become an oppressor? Right? So like, it's very arbitrary. We see that still today in the sense where it's cultural Marxism. So now instead of being pitted against rich and poor, which we still are, it's also black and white and male and female and all the different types of identities that we have today. But back to that specifically, we talk about it being the ability in the United States has been this is why people come to the United States, is the ability to move up through those classes. And I think to your point, we still identify them that way, middle class, upper class, et cetera, which I think is okay, as long as you're able to move up and down through those classes. And so I think we still see the ability to move up through those classes today. The problem that we really see those, most people don't have the ability to fall back down once they're there. And so that's a piece that we really hit on. There's a the fiat money system has created a system that there's no accountability, no responsibility for making bad decisions. And so, these big Wall Street firms, the politicians, they privatize wins and they socialize losses. And so they're able to use the government apparatus through cronyism to build these moats and allow unfair competition. And when they make bad decisions, they get papered over, like bailing out the airlines, et cetera, where what should happen is that those people made bad decisions. They should lose their money. They should lose their position. That money should then be redistributed out naturally back to all the other participants. The assets get picked back up, and then it allows more opportunity for more people to come up because some people have come back down. And so I think that's the real big piece that we try to hit on, is that ability for people to go both up and down, not just up. I don't know, Alex, if you want to add on to that.
Alex, I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, I think Mark just nailed it. It's so important. Like it's not a one-way street. Civilization is two-way. And if by definition, if someone is papering their losses and socializing them, by definition, they are stealing from everyone else, and that is creating this system which is unfair. In this pursuit of creating equality, it's madness.
Yeah, we talk about going up and down in classes in terms of how much money you have. That's sort of a function of what we use to measure people's class level. In that context, what is money? You guys you do a very good job, I think, of explaining what you think money is, like redefining the term money in the book.
So
yeah,
okay,
we
go ahead.
We put a definition for the word value. I'm sorry, for the word money in the book. One of our friends has a podcast called "What Is Money?" because there's such a misconception about what money is. It was just summarized very simply, sort of like Marx summarized communism very simply, but money being the language of value. And so it's that simple, but then what does that mean? What is value, right? So Alex, go ahead and jump in on that.
Yeah, so I guess money you can define metaphysically and all sorts of things, but it's effectively like you could look at it as a scorecard in civilization, and it's like how much value, which is this kind of intangible, subjective concept, have you been able to produce in civilization or in a society? And money is kind of a way to measure that, and you have like a scorecard, and the higher your scorecard, the different level of class you have the opportunity to be in. So if we just kind of think about it in a school sense, right? Like if you really, really excel at mathematics and you have a higher score, you may go to a more advanced class. And your score gives you access to that. If you're really bad at mathematics, your score in math might be really low, but your score in English might be really high. And this is where the class thing is. It's also multifaceted, or as we say in the book, it's multidimensional. Like there is some people who are in a very high class in sport or physical activity. You know, they might be a fantastic surfer, but a really bad writer, or a really bad mathematician. Someone might be a fantastic physicist, but a really bad football player, or whatever. So humanity in existence is multidimensional, but in the money sense, in the adding value, tangible value to people in their lives, and people willing to trade the excess product of their labor, their excess money, for that value, that there needs to be a mechanism for us to score that at the macro scale in a civilization. And that is effectively what money does. It's this language of value that allows us to score our relative position. And of course, that is going to create different classes. But as again, it comes back to that stasis versus dynamism, is that if it's not dynamic, if there isn't an ability to rotate through, you get stultification of the system. You get this situation where it's not even like rich getting richer, poor getting poorer doesn't really define it well. It's actually the parasites leeching more and the productive people being leached from more. That's really what's happening in the current political and socio-economic and political apparatus that we sort of live within, is that if you are close enough to the monetary spigot, so if you're Wall Street, if you're a banker, if you're a big, publicly traded company or whatever, if you are close enough to that monetary spigot where the money gets produced by the central banks and it can flow through to you first, you are a beneficiary of the Cantillon effect, essentially, and you get to acquire that newly minted money early, and by the time it flows on to everyone else, you have a massive advantage. So that's one. Then there's the regulatory component, close to the government, etc. This is where, initially Rockefeller was a fantastic innovator in the early days, and where things went haywire was when the Rockefeller company and Standard Oil began to create partnerships with government to build regulatory moats and actually establish real monopolies. Beforehand, they actually had a monopoly, and a transient monopoly, based on the fact that they were more productive and more efficient at extracting oil and standardizing the process of shipping it and transporting it around. When the Texans came out, they would have outcompeted Standard Oil had the government not blundered their way in and created all of this regulatory moat crap in and around it, which made it difficult for the Texans to even compete, and it kind of destroyed everything downstream. So this is always, I guess, why you want the economic component of a civilization to be outside of any political influence, and this is why we have such a strong opinion of Bitcoin, and why it, in and of itself, is such an important innovation in the world, is that it finally takes the money and places it outside of everyone's hands. There's no central bank able to mess with it. There's no politics able to mess with it. There's no country able to. It's just there. That is the scorecard, and it's fixed. No one can mess with it in the same way as they can't mess with time and energy, and like those are fixed constants in the universe. That's what we have. And now we're all free to compete, and may the best man win. May the best he who adds the most value amass the most value. It's very simple after that. The game becomes fair, but it's for damn sure not equal.
But that is not possible in a fiat system.
No, we keep coming back to creating more money.
Yeah. So if money is, as it's described, a measure of value, but the money itself changes based on the amount that the government prints or spends or what they spend it on, then that tool as a measure of value moves.
Think about trying to build a house with an elastic tape measure. That's the analogy I always give people. You're not going to build a house. You're going to build
I mean, we're experiencing it right now. We're in a massive inflationary period. So the measure of value is actually moving like on a monthly basis. And so people who are planning for retirement or trying to pay like college tuition or whatever, the measure of the value of that is moving constantly. and it's hard to.
Yeah, and it affects obviously the retirees, to your point, but it creates or causes everybody in the marketplace to make decisions based off bad or faulty information. And so, like setting the price of money, for example, would tell me, hey, if the price of money is low, then that means more people are saving. There's savings that are built up. There's discretionary spending available. So I'll go create this product. But that is artificially being kept low, and really there is no demand. There is no artificial or there is no discretionary spending. And so now I've created this business, I've expanded my business, et cetera, made these decisions based off faulty information. And then even worse than that, to the point of it being like an elastic band, and your point of it being high inflation, it was high inflation. They stretched it way out, and now they're shrinking it back down again. And so now I'm still making decisions based off of that, but I didn't know when they were going to start shrinking it back down again. And then I get caught in that. So we don't go super deep into that in this book necessarily, but really just kind of explaining how in a free open market things could be better. And I think I just want to add one last piece onto the question of what is money. And I think one of the reasons why it's important for that definition to be in there in this book specifically is because in the original book, which again we don't try to refute point by point, but in the original book he says that the poor people, the proletariat, they have nothing of value. All they have is their labor. And so their labor doesn't ever equal, never turns into capital. So they have nothing of value. And so we go on and say, no, capital. So we define capital as more than just money, right? It's your ideas, it's your intellectual capital, for example, right? So it's your labor. All of those things are your capital. So going back to what is money, money is storage of value. And everybody has the ability to create value in the marketplace.
So just to go back to Bitcoin, because I know that as you get through the argument, you end up near the end of the book talking a lot about Bitcoin. It's been fluctuating. When like last November is $68,000, and then it dropped down. I think it reached as low as like 19,000, and now it's moving back up. So Bitcoin is still measured against the dollar, which is a fiat movable measure. So when you guys are talking to the people at your conferences and when you're talking about the book on podcasts and stuff like that, how do you explain the volatility of Bitcoin in terms of being priced in dollars?
Yeah, I think people need to view the price as what it really is it's an exchange rate. That's it. The price of Bitcoin can be measured in eggs. It can be measured in vehicles. It could be measured in a house. It could be measured in, bottles of water, whatever you want to measure it against. It's just that the most liquid asset globally to measure Bitcoin against is the US dollar. So that's the primary exchange rate or the primary price that people use to measure it. Now, when we think about what price reflects the midpoint of all of the collective valuations in the marketplace for that good, right? That's effectively what the price of anything is, whether that is water or eggs or Bitcoin or a table or whatever. Like there is a midpoint. That's the price point, particularly in a very liquid marketplace. Like when you're talking about, the euro versus the US dollar, or the Bitcoin versus the US dollar, or the Australian dollar versus the yen. When you're talking about a liquid marketplace of two goods, the midpoint is the price that all bidders on one side versus sellers on the other side are willing to meet at. Now, if we think about Bitcoin, how many people in the first place could accurately define what the hell money is? I would venture to say maybe 1% of the global population, maybe less. And then of those who can accurately define money, how many of those actually understand Bitcoin and understand why it is better money, why it is superior money? Maybe a fraction of that 1%. So what you're talking about is a money that is poorly understood by the world, that is emerging. The first Bitcoin transaction was 2 pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin, right? So that is, today worth $230 million. But at that point in time, it was worth $25 for, 10,000 Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is this kind of emergent money. And by definition, it is not a fiat money. So fiat means by decree, right? So we cannot decree the price or the value of Bitcoin. Like what we need to see is we need to see the market discover it. And we're 12, 13 years into the discovery of Bitcoin's value, of Bitcoin's purchasing power. Gold took about 2,500, 3,000 years to monetize. It's a long time. Fiat currencies don't sort of sit in that basket because fiat currencies have been, their value has been established by decree. So what we're actually have the opportunity to do with Bitcoin is we're seeing an organic money start from nothing, from zero, and have value basically from the marketplace be imbued on it. And the price is merely buyers and sellers and their differing opinions about where Bitcoin is. So if someone asks me, like, what do I value Bitcoin as? I value one Bitcoin probably closer to 100 million or a billion a coin in terms of US dollar paper money, right? So I think by the time my lifespan is over, one Bitcoin would probably be enough to buy you half the city of Austin, for example, or half of California, because California is probably going to be worth less than the city of Austin. But anyway, like at the rate they're going. So like, I'm thinking in terms of purchasing power, and there's a great little meme that sometimes floats around. It's basically a trolley full of goods, and it's like what one Bitcoin bought you then versus how much it bought you in sort of 2012, 2014, 2016. And basically, the trolley just gets full of goods, right? And now, like in 2022, one Bitcoin is buying you, high-tech TV, Sonos, like all the nice goods. In another couple of years, one Bitcoin will buy you a house. And 5-6 years after that, one Bitcoin will buy you a bloody apartment complex. After that, it'll continue to monetize. And as that process happens, what's going to happen? More and more people, particularly merchants, that this is where the key kicker is that when merchants have the light bulb moment to say, I'm not going to accept government issued money by some bureaucrat for the product or service that I'm doing, I will only accept Bitcoin. As more and more merchants do that, what you'll see is more people will shift onto Bitcoin, and that demand will then drive, the next cycles. And I always use myself as an example. Like I do speaking gigs sometimes, I get paid. I write. I will only accept Bitcoin. Like if someone offered to pay me in dollars, I would laugh in their face. I would say I would not degrade myself to accept toilet paper money with like dead people printed on it. Like that to me is useless. Like some idiot conjured it up in a central bank. Like I would not degrade myself to trade the product of my labor for fake money. Like in the same way as if I asked you today, I'll come and renovate your kitchen, and you turn around and offer to pay me in seashells, I'd slap you. Like it's absolutely ridiculous. So it's the same thing. It's like, as people have that light bulb moment, as they shift away from, as they realize that, wait a minute, money is not that which the government issues. Money is the language of value, and they're going to look for the thing that represents the language of value best. And Bitcoin just does that perfectly. It transforms energy into money, number one. Number two, it's fixed. Number three, like it's fixed in supply and fixed in sense of the rules. There is no better possible version of money that civilization can have. And it's digital, and it's portable, and it's fungible, and it's all of the attributes that we want in money. When you compare that against this ridiculous paper money or digital money issued by the government, through which they can control your every move, your every decision, like there's a night and day comparison. And that's where we are. Like the price, yes, it's going to fluctuate 20 grand, 60 grand, 3 grand, 2 grand. None of it matters. Like that's just the emergent evolutionary process. We opened the podcast talking about complex systems and the complex evolutionary emergent process of things that are free. And that's effectively the process Bitcoin's going to go through. It'll be the same when Bitcoin gets to 600,000 and drops to 200,000. People are going to freak out again, and it'll be the same thing over and over again.
But do you see that sort of speculative nature from the dollar side as an impediment to people adapting or adopting?
Not really. It's because what it does is it sucks people in. And then what will happen is, of the, let's say 100 people get sucked into Bitcoin through speculation, 5 will stick around because they'll understand what it is. and they will trade the product of their, so they'll trade their dollars for Bitcoin and they'll never go out. They'll never leave. So now you basically ratchet up the baseline for Bitcoin. And if you look at Bitcoin's price chart, and particularly the log chart, you'll actually see that each cycle is just a ratchet higher. And it's a ratchet higher, it's a ratchet higher. Now, that'll continue until the saturation reaches a point where the modulation, basically the difference in relative price, is going to taper off, because for two reasons. Number one, the price will be so high in nominal terms, but number two, there'll be less available to pull off exchanges and to speculate and trade with. At the moment, 19 million Bitcoin, I think, have been produced by the network. That is 91% of all Bitcoin in total that'll ever exist. And more of that is coming off exchanges and moving onto cold storage or self-custody, meaning that it's not available to be traded. So as that continues, particularly over the next few years, that'll taper off. The ability to go and speculate on Bitcoin will diminish, and the need or the desire to use it as savings or as a transactional piece will start to mature. We're just in that phase. We're 13 years in. You know, once we get past the 20-year phase, Bitcoin will look very different. And that sort of difference in purchasing power will start to taper off.
I do want to just say real quickly, talking about the book, The Uncommunist Manifesto, it's not a book about Bitcoin. We subtly mention it, I think maybe about 10 times throughout the book. One short section about it. But I think to the points that we've kind of already discovered or uncovered as we've been discussing this, you start to draw these conclusions when you read the book and understand the economic system, and you start to draw conclusions and realize, well, shoot, the system that we have today isn't ever going to work. We're going to be stuck in the same problem. The only way to get out of that is to have some sort of a sound money system, of course, which traditionally has been the solution for that. But now there's a better form of sound money. So it's not a book about Bitcoin. It's a book, but I think you start to draw the conclusion that maybe Bitcoin is the only option that we have.
Yeah.
And of course, we're happy to sit here and talk about it all day.
Well, I didn't mean to imply that it was. I just wanted to tie it into the themes of the book, because it's a critique of Marxist ideology, which has, as Gramsci put it, marched its way through our institutions. And as you pointed out when you were counting the 10 points of Marxism, many of them are being put in place, but they're just not called Marxism. You know,
right.
Like take over education and agriculture. Transportation is regulated heavily. The way we communicate through the FCC and stuff like that. They're all Marxist ideas that have been implemented without most people being aware. And now it's sort of openly discussed as if maybe it is a better system, which is just absurd. And I think it's a good, that's why I'm talking to you about the book, because you're refuting the base ideas that have found their way into our society.
Yeah, I think what we found is that society is overrun with people who don't think past headlines, right? So we're in this attention span deficit. Nobody can spend the time to learn about these things, as we already kind of discussed. People don't even really understand what money is, and they use it every day, and they just don't understand it. And so there's this first order thinking plague that we could call that. And so a lot of people, when presented with an idea like this, especially when they learn it through university, through one of their professors who they, have been told as an expert or whatever, right? I think naturally they could just go, oh, well, I guess that sounds like an okay way. He made some good arguments, and I guess that's just the way it is. And so a lot of people accept that as it is, but they've never really ran through second, third order thinking on this. And I think when ideas are challenged, when people would, if people would just take the time to actually think through this, I think they could see it as another way, which of course, which is why they don't want these ideas to be out there. I say that good ideas win because they're better. And so if we had those free, open communication channels, and people would be willing to spend a little bit of time to actually think through this, they'd see that pretty quickly. But of course, to the 10 points in the book, or in the original book, controlling the means of communication. So stopping those discussion of these free market ideas is a key point. But I think a point that Alex and I talk about extensively is that we don't need the majority. We only need the minority. And so, Marxism came into the United States, maybe in the 60s and 70s into the universities. Some people say as early as the 30s. But either way, a small minority got into the universities, and look how they've changed the way the entire world works today. If you look at the Revolutionary War, it was a small minority. And so we don't need the masses. The masses just kind of come and go. They just kind of go along with what everybody else is doing. And so I think if we can get these good ideas to the people that matter, to the minority, I think we can shift that whole mindset.
Well, what's the best way for people to get the book?
The best way to get the book is just go right to Amazon. It just was released at the time of this recording 2 days ago. We already hit the bestseller status, I think, in some categories. So that's pretty cool. So the best way is just go there and do that. And then check out the website, uncommunist.com, because we have a bunch of other resources that we have available. So go buy the book, come to the website. You can enter that information and get access to behind the scenes discussion videos, charts that we have in the book, and lots of other information.
Great. Mark, I saw you had a copy in your hand. Could you hold it up? People, when they go to Amazon,
Yeah,
know
that's the cover.
Yeah.
It's not a dark book. It's not a doom and gloom book. It's a book of hope. And we hope to challenge people, inspire people. Maybe we should have made the book white, but when we tested it, it seemed like people like the black book better.
That's good. I liked it a lot. I read it really fast too. So that's another thing, is that you're taking like some really big historical ideas and you make them very accessible.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about concise books, but particularly, I mean, part of it is that we live in a world with a very short attention span, and I'm not saying that that's a good thing. I actually think that that's a net bad thing. I look forward to the days that people once again read more long form and actually think deeper and go through ideas. But by virtue of the fact that we live in that world, I think that's one way this book might be able to capture the zeitgeist of the time. It is short, and it's a 1 hour read. If you're a really slow reader, it might take you 90 minutes, but I think that's real benefit. But as an add-on to that, I think there is also something to be said about a couple of really good ideas in one place that you can take away and then have that really shift the direction of your thinking long term. Like, you don't need to read Human Action by Mises, which has 1,000 fantastic ideas, but trying to go and like get the everyday person to read 1,200 pages from Mises is never going to happen. But anyone can pick up 80 pages, read it, come away with a couple really solid ideas, and have that really help shift the direction of their thinking and adjust the lens through which they see the world. Because this is, once again, it's a lens that doesn't, unlike Marx's book, like you read that book and out the back of it, you feel like a victim and you feel like you should be entitled to more. And that if you only demand and yell and scream louder and, demand that you are part of the oppressed group, you'll be okay. Like, that's basically, if we had to sum up the Communist Manifesto. Our book says, stop being a baby. You're better than what you think, and you're better than what the state tells you. You should be responsible. If you work hard, and we have a structurally sound money and an economic system, then you'll be able to climb. And if you're a lazy bum that doesn't want to do anything, by all means, you don't have to, but be prepared to fall in economic status. So it's a message of responsibility and freedom. And that, I think, is a far better, more empowering message for individuals to hear than, I don't have what I want, so the government should give it to me.
The only thing I would take issue with is it takes longer than an hour to read.
Okay.
Because the definitions. If the book without.
Not for that reason though. You could just read it in an hour, but it's very thought provoking. So when I was reading it, I would read a couple pages and then I'd find myself like thinking it over. Then I'd like go get some coffee and come back and then read some more, and it would start making me think again. So you can read it. It is a short book,
right? But
it's very thought provoking, and like I've said already a couple of times, you take in the ideas and express them so simply that it invites you to think about them and think how how they frame our worldview.
Thank
So
you.
anyway, I want to thank you guys for joining me, Mark and Alex. This is a really interesting conversation. I went to school for this kind of stuff, so I totally geek out on it. But I really appreciated the read and this conversation today. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very
Addison.
much. Really appreciate it.